All right, guys, did you get one? Apparently, some people did because all the ones that were there are sold out, at least as far as I've been able to find. I didn't look that hard because I did finally decide that I'm at least not buying the reference card versions. I could still consider the AIB partners that are coming out soon. But anyway, we've got the big Navi cards out, 6800 and the 6800 XT. Reviews are out today, and I've got a lot of thoughts. Now, in case any of you are clicking on this video and haven't seen my channel before, just letting you know that my channel's pretty new, not even 2 months old. There's no way I get sent review samples, so if you're looking for reviews from me, that's not what this is. I'm just a math teacher that enjoys technology. I've been posting content about that, and I'm really interested in these cards. I have been thinking about buying one. I've been looking at all the reviews this morning. Well, not literally all of them. Nobody has time to literally read all the reviews, but I've read a lot of them, watched some of the YouTube ones, and I've got a lot of thoughts about this, specifically thinking about, okay, did AMD deliver on its promises? Can they actually compete at the high end now? Who should buy one of these, if anyone? Are you considering buying an NVIDIA card or an AMD card right now? I think there's a lot of people it would make sense to buy one of these, but there's also people who definitely shouldn't. I want to get into that, and let's hop right into it. So first of all, I do want to get into some performance results, and I want to be clear. I watched a whole bunch of reviews, read a whole bunch of reviews, and this is just a convenient graph for me to display, and everybody's going to have different results depending on which games they tested, but I like this graph from Tom's Hardware, and all the links to anything I show you in this video will be in my description. So what this is from Tom's Hardware is a 9-game average at 4K ultra settings in the games that they tested. And I like an average of 9 games because that's going to even things out a bit. Because we've seen, especially at 4K, that in certain titles, NVIDIA has a big win, in certain titles, AMD has a win, and in others, they're performing basically equally. So here's 9 games tested. If you tested a different 9 games, these would probably fall in slightly different positions. That's how benchmarks work, guys. Different games perform differently, and the ones that you select are going to influence your results. But in this particular one, I think that this represents pretty well what I saw across most of the major reviewers that I've been able to read or watch the reviews at this point. And it's basically showing that at 4K, the NVIDIA cards win. They win at 4K, not in every game, but on average. However, the 3080 versus 6800 XT is not a dominant win. It's a win, but not a dominant win. So, and by the way, we're not talking about ray tracing right now. That's a separate topic, okay? So in traditional rasterized performance with no ray tracing, and we're not getting into DLSS or anything like that, can the 6800 XT compete with the 3080 at 4K? Absolutely, it can. It can compete, and in some titles it can win, in other titles it loses, but it's right there. So did AMD deliver on a 3080 competitor with the 6800 XT in traditional rasterized performance? Absolutely. Nice job, AMD, and I'm very excited to see this. It has been, what, 9 or 10 years since AMD was actually competing with the highest performing NVIDIA cards at this kind of a competitive level. Now, looking at the 6800, this is really, it's a weird card. It's not that much more money to just buy an XT. And it's jump down if you just want to get a 3070. And it does clearly, on average, at 4K, beat the 3070. But then, like, it's not that much more money to buy the XT. So should you just buy the XT? And right now, considering out of stock, you know, maybe it comes down to whichever one you actually have available. I'll have more thoughts at the end here on which card I think a person should get for each thing. But here's honestly my conclusion at 4K. So if you specifically are targeting 4K, I think this chart tells us something. The 3080 or the 6800 XT could perform well for you at 4K. I would probably not get the 6800 for 4K. I think it makes more sense for 1440p. although it can perform at 4K. As we're seeing, it's delivering averages and even the 99th percentiles above 60 frames per second. So I'm not saying it's bad for 4K, but there's not a lot of headroom there for future titles. Both of these cards would do better for you. Now, that's if you don't factor in ray tracing or DLSS or any of the other technologies that NVIDIA is bringing to the table. Now, some of you might be wondering, what about smart access memory? What about rage mode? Well, in the reviews I've been able to look at so far that take those into account, yes, smart access memory gives you an advantage in certain titles. Also, NVIDIA is theoretically bringing out a competitor to that, but they don't have it yet, so I don't want to consider that. The same way that AMD should have a DLSS competitor, but they don't have it yet, so I don't want to consider that right now. Just those could be coming. But it wasn't a major on average performance increase from smart access memory. On average, it's a very small increase. It's nice to have, but you need very specific hardware to run it. So I'm not going to have it factor in as a major purchase decision, at least if it was me making the decision. If you happen to have all the relevant technology, that might be more meaningful to you. Now, the rage mode in most of the reviews I saw did basically nothing. And honestly, it's adjusting a power slider. It's not even a real overclock. If you want to actually overclock, you should actually overclock. So rage mode to me is nothing. But that's just my opinion. Maybe yours differs, but I didn't see anybody saying that in most games rage mode really did much besides make your fan louder. There were a few games where you got an extra % or 2 of performance, but many where it did basically nothing. Anyway, so at 4K, personally, I'd buy NVIDIA. I'd buy the 3080. For $50 more, you're getting better 4K performance, and I haven't, again, shown you the graphs yet, but let's just say much better ray tracing performance, as well as they already have DLSS, which 4K ray tracing sometimes really requires to actually run. I understand DLSS is sort of cheating, but in some titles it works pretty well. And the AMD version is at this point still a giant question mark and doesn't exist yet, okay? So my recommendation for 4K gaming is a 3080. Not saying the 6800 XT is a bad choice. If you particularly want to go with AMD, you're excited about AMD technology, you prefer the company, you can find one in stock and you can't find a 3080 in stock. If that's all the case, I think the 6800 XT is a great choice for 4K gaming as long as you don't care much about ray tracing. All right, these are just some frames per second, blah, blah, blah. I'm more interested in, okay, 1440p is where I think a lot more people are actually gaming compared to 4K. So at 1440, I think this becomes a much more interesting discussion. So where are we at with this? Again, looking at the 6800 XT versus the 3080, they are basically tied in Tom's hardware, particularly 9 set of games on average. But I mean, look at the performance here. Let's say that you're somebody with a 1440p 144 hertz monitor, and you want to actually drive 144 frames per second on average in your games at ultra settings. Well, the 6800 XT can do that, on average delivering above 144 frames per second, and even the 99th percentile lows being over 100 frames per second on average. That's great. That's fantastic. So if you're somebody going for 1440p, 144 like high refresh rate, I think the 6800 XT makes a whole heck of a lot of sense, but so does a 3080. And again, it might come down to which one you can find in stock and whether or not you care about things like ray tracing. Now, the 6800 for less money is also delivering fantastic 1440p for performance, I can speak. Whereas the 3070, again, also very, very solid. But if you want to be closer to your 144 hertz monitor refresh rate more of the time, then the 6800 might be more where you're looking at. And there's definitely people who don't care about ray tracing. If you're somebody who's like competitive gamer, right? So you're CSGO, Valorant, whatever, you're into the shooters, and you want to be driving high refresh rates, you want turn down the settings, get rid of ray tracing for sure. I think that the 6800 is an extremely compelling card for 1440p high refresh rate. For that competitive gamer kind of person who's not too worried about ray tracing in single player games. Anyways, that's my take at 1440. And honestly, if you're going down to 1080p, most of these cards are kind of overkill. Unless you're, again, somebody trying to drive like a 240 hertz 1080p monitor for competitive situations, where once again, the 6800 at 1080p is delivering some really, really good frame rates. So is the 3080, so is the 6800. And at this lower resolution, we can actually see the 6800 XT above the 3080. So this is kind of driving home what we're seeing here, which is I think the Infinity Cache on the AMD cards performs better at 1440p and 1080p than it does at 4K. Or possibly another way of looking at this is that Ampere doesn't scale as well at 1440 and 1080. But whichever way you're looking at this, it does seem to be the case that at 4K, NVIDIA's cards relative to AMD's are more compelling. And as you lower the resolution, the charts here, the percentage difference between the cards, the relative performance between AMD and NVIDIA, it seems to me like AMD does better the lower your resolution is. So again, for somebody who's not trying to do 4K, you're going 1080p or 1440 high refresh rate rasterized performance. I think AMD cards are very, very, very compelling. And that's kind of what I have to say about that. As soon as you start caring about ray tracing, I've got to say AMD, okay, so my video yesterday was some leaked early AMD published ray tracing results. And I had a lot of hate in the comment section there from people saying that like, oh, when I'm comparing that and I'm seeing that the NVIDIA cards, the 3080 has like 64% better like performance in ray tracing compared to the 6800 XT in certain games, that can't be right. I'm lying. I'm an NVIDIA shill. I'm performing bad tests. And I'll be honest, again, I wasn't doing what a reviewer could do, which is compare the exact same cards on the exact same system, in the exact same part of the game and all of that. Well, now that we have that, let's take a look and see if I was way off base by saying that NVIDIA has drastically better ray tracing performance than AMD, which I think anybody who's really been following the technology would expect. It's AMD's first attempt at ray tracing, and it's NVIDIA's second attempt. It's their second generation. We're expecting them to win here, guys, and they do, okay? So anyway, at 4K on this particular 10-game average, again, let's take a look. Now, I do want to be clear that this is the ray tracing performance, guys, okay? I'm looking at the ray tracing performance since I don't think it actually said it specifically on the graph, okay? All right, so the 3080 clearly has a significant win over the 6800 XT. When we were looking at rasterized performance, these two cards were absolutely neck and neck, and at some lower resolutions, the 6800 XT was winning, okay? The 6800, again, in rasterized performance, was beating the 3070 very handily on average, but you kick on ray tracing, and it is, on average, losing to the 3070. And remember, the 3070 is less money than a 6800. Again, if you can actually get them in stock and at MSRP. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, first of all, again, at 4K ultra settings with ray tracing on, NVIDIA has a clear and dominant victory. So let's look at a average here. So like 35.6 is the 3080 average divided by 27.3. So that's a 30% average advantage for the 3080 over the 6800 XT in these particular titles. Now, one thing I'm going to mention about this is that the particular titles you test has a huge impact on this. I was watching the Gamers Nexus review, and if you look at something like Minecraft RTX, which again, maybe you don't care about that, but that's kind of the issue with ray tracing in general. But in Minecraft RTX, the advantage was much bigger. It was, I think, like 100%-ish advantage. Like the 3080 had double the performance of the 6800 XT. Whereas there were other titles like Shadows of the Tomb Raider where the advantage was much smaller for NVIDIA. So to be clear, ray tracing implementations vary drastically by the title. The types of things you can do with ray tracing are very, very diverse. And the way the game implements it can be very diverse. And I will mention, the currently released ray tracing titles have had a while to be optimized for NVIDIA cards since they've been doing ray tracing for a while now, whereas these AMD cards are just releasing. And it's possible that these titles could be updated or AMD drivers could be updated in a way that would increase their performance here. But honestly, a lot of times older games don't see a lot of updates for new architectures. But where we could see this gap close a little bit is with newer games that have been designed with the new consoles in mind, because the new consoles do run AMD GPUs that are basically just smaller versions of these, right? They're the RDNA 2 GPUs, and they have ray tracing functionality just like these, again, based on the AMD implementation. So it's very possible that the future games coming out with ray tracing in mind, designed for consoles first, since, face it, that's how a lot of games are designed, will be designed in a way that will perform better, not better on AMD hardware, but better on average compared to NVIDIA than these current games are, right, that we have to test right now. So all I'm trying to say is it's possible that in future titles, with future driver updates from AMD and games designed with the new consoles in mind, that this gap will close in those future titles. But if you're looking at what's available right now, and ray tracing performance right now that we can actually measure and not think about hypothetical future situations, NVIDIA has an absolute clear win here. But again, I want you to consider the fact that you might not care about ray tracing. And honestly, when you turn on ray tracing, you have a big performance hit on both cards. So there's a lot of people who would rather keep the high frame rate and just leave ray tracing off. And if you're one of those people, then the AMD cards suddenly make a whole lot more sense. Whereas if you're somebody who will be turning on ray tracing a lot, and that's a big selling point for you, then honestly, get an NVIDIA card if you can find one in stock. They offer better ray tracing performance right now. Flat out, period, they offer better ray tracing performance. Again, that gap could close in the future, but that's the future and that's hypotheticals. AMD is doing a great job for their first time around with ray tracing, but it is nowhere near what NVIDIA has with their second generation of ray tracing. And that's just the reality of the situation. Feel free to yell at me in the comment section, okay? But that's the situation, guys. That's it, okay? All right, now, if we look at 1440p, again, ultra settings with ray tracing on, we are still seeing a massive lead for the 3080 over the 6800 XT. And on average in these tests, we're not even getting the 6800 XT at 1440 averaging 60 frames per second, which I think is, again, what you'd really like to see here. Now, can they deliver that in certain titles? Yes, absolutely. Are they delivering it on average in all of these titles? No, okay? And again, the 6800 losing to the 3070, which is a cheaper card if you care about ray tracing, okay? And at 1080p, we now have, once again, with ray tracing on, at least the 6800 XT is now delivering an average above 60 frames per second, and the 6800 is averaging right about 60 frames per second. But the 6800 is still losing to the 3070, and the 6800 XT is still significantly behind the 3080. All right, so once again, wrapping up the ray tracing segment. If you care about ray tracing and you can get an NVIDIA card, do it. If you don't really care about ray tracing, you might turn it on every now and again in a game that supports it, that's maybe single player and you don't care as much about the frame rate, and you primarily care about driving high frame rates, especially at 1440p or 1080p, get yourself an AMD card, or at least consider getting yourself an AMD card. Now, this video is running very long now, but I do want to throw in a few things that I did see from some reviewers. Jay's 2 cents mentioned that sometimes when he would start up his, so I'm talking about driver issues kind of things now, guys. So he mentioned that sometimes when he'd start up look at his driver, his automatic settings, like for the power and fan, those types of things, sometimes wouldn't save properly when he'd start them up. He also mentioned like when he opened up the game Control, the 6800 XT would lock in at a really low clock speed for some reason, and then suddenly would just unlock back to normal, but it was really unpredictable when that would happen, so that's some kind of weird glitch happening. And I do want to be clear that when NVIDIA's cards first launched, they had issues too. So this is not unique to AMD, but I know some people are considering driver issues and things like that. And yeah, AMD does still have at least some minor driver things to worry about, but I did not see any absolutely major thing from any of the reviews that I read where they had any massive things that they couldn't deal with, or that wouldn't be an easy fix. Now, in terms of productivity software, I'm gonna say right now that that's not what I'm focused on. I am mostly buying things for gamers. That's what I understand better. But I will say in the Linus Tech Tips review, they mentioned that in certain productivity tasks, AMD uses OpenCL versus NVIDIA using CUDA. And in certain things, they couldn't even run the test in a usable way using the AMD cards. And I don't know enough about those specific programs to know who uses what or cares about that. But if you're somebody worried about productivity tasks, I would say you should definitely look very carefully into reviews or other users who are using the particular AMD card on the particular productivity program that you're interested in, and check if it's actually compatible and actually has good performance. There are definitely situations where having 16 gigabytes of VRAM versus a 3080 having 10 gigabytes of VRAM is going to be a big advantage for you, but there are also other programs that just aren't seeming to support AMD very well in the productivity space. And that's another thing I do want to end the video with, which is another reason why you might want to buy the AMD cards. Lots more VRAM. And that could be an issue in the future, as some titles are already starting to push that 8 gigabyte to 10 gigabyte usage, and these cards are just coming out now, right? So definitely something to think about. Final thoughts is, man, this is the most complicated GPU review that I think has ever existed. Because let's think about it, guys. Usually you just run the games and you publish the results, which one did better, right? But now we've got, okay, but is smart access memory turned on or is it turned off? Is rage mode, if you actually want to consider that one, turned on or turned off, versus an actual overclock on or overclock off? And then, oh my God, let's throw in ray tracing. Ray tracing on versus ray tracing off. And so this is, DLSS on versus DLSS off. This is by far the most confusing round of graphics cards I have ever seen, because so much of this is actually going to come down to personal preferences versus which card is objectively better or which card is objectively offering a better performance per dollar. If you're somebody who cares a lot about ray tracing, NVIDIA is clearly better. If you're somebody who doesn't care very much about ray tracing, then AMD might be offering you the same or better performance for less money. And you're going to have to make these decisions for yourself. And I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments section. Personally, I'm at least waiting for the board partner cards, but I'm honestly probably going to skip a generation here. I think I'm going to keep my 2070 a little bit longer. I might grab one of the current gen consoles if I can find one in stock. One of the like current gen, I guess next gen. Like maybe grab a PS5 and then grab a RDNA 3 card, because that's my biggest takeaway from this is AMD has made massive gains in a short period of time for their graphics cards. And this is similar to what they've been doing with their CPUs. And I'm assuming that RDNA 3 is where we are gonna really, really at least have the possibility. It depends on how NVIDIA responds. But I think that could be extremely interesting. And since my current graphics card is still hanging in there okay, I think I might hang on for one more generation. What are you guys gonna do? Let me know in the comments, and I hope you have an excellent day.